working towards heritage reimagined in such a significant and important way. And I have so many questions to ask, but I will center this discussion around some of the major things that I think all of us can learn a lot from you. The first amongst them is, because we're talking about Heritage Reimagined, is historic consciousness. I'd love to hear, obviously, from each one of you about historic consciousness. In the race for development of a new country, we're about just a little over 75 years old, like India, at par with the rest of the world, do you think our design aspirations somehow lost sight of the ancient historic consciousness that should have ideally guided us somewhere in the beginning of when you started your practice? And did we somehow collectively, in the beginning, abandon a regional identity for a global inclusion? And how did you sort of tackle that as your practice grew? Tarun.
Oh, that's a big question. But, I'm going to speak, obviously, primarily about fashion. It has changed. It's true that all the things you mentioned have actually happened. And I was reflecting on it, but I think there are many reasons why this happened. And I'll give you a very personal story about the way I was brought up in South Bombay, where I really think we were victims of Lord Macaulay's doctrine to educate Indians to be westernized and or Englishified so that we could serve the colonizers better. And we were not even conscious of it. We went to Jesuit schools. We did silly things that when I think back at it, for instance, at Doon School, we wore 100% woolen stockings in summer. And when I asked them, why did we do that, or play soccer, they said, but that's what they did in Scotland. And I said, but we're in 40 degrees centigrade weather, it's 2 degrees over there. So no one thought about it. And I distinctly, when I think back, think that we were so keen on being westernized or Western-oriented gentlemen. I went to piano lessons. I can't go to a concert in India and understand what they're saying because we were never exposed to it. So that was the background that I came from. Also, India has changed a lot. We lived in a certain way. We had lifestyle changes. Colonization came, which made urban Indians want to try and be Western because it got them ahead. It got you into jobs. It got you associated with the elite. And then somehow that stayed on as a kind of snobbery, If you speak great English, you can get a job anywhere. But if you speak good Hindi and don't speak good English, you can't work in a bank here, you can't work in a hotel. And therefore, you're telling people very clearly that by speaking Hindi, you're in a way a second-class citizen because you won't have access to the same things. But these are all things that took me a long time to understand. And our lifestyles changed so much. So when we talk about tradition, and now I've gone back, basically once I got into fashion, I traveled around this country in places I never would have. And I grew to love it and engage with it in a way that I was not exposed to. But when I think about tradition, we have to do tradition in a modern way because our lifestyles have changed and design has changed to adapt it. But we need to balance it, not abandoning tradition for another, but understanding that lifestyles have changed. So while my grandmother might have swum in a sari and thought that was normal, if today people are going to run in pants or a shalwar kameez, because their lifestyles have changed, that's normal, and design therefore has to adapt. But I think the change has been so spectacularly fast, and we also went from 350 million people to 1.4 billion. There's been this global, assault of information and technology, and still this lingering thing that to be Western is better, Everyone still has to have a black tie, and Bollywood is also a huge proponent of it. So this global inclusion is inevitable. We benefited from it. But we don't have to be derivative and, aping. And I think that language and confidence is coming to us Indians now. Because I think what's coming up from the grassroots, what's coming up from craft, and what's coming up from us who have been more comfortable and easy and, relevantly throwing off, shackles that might have been put on us unconsciously to really engaging and adapting. I think that's a huge difference in the way I look at, when I go to work today versus, 25 years back. When we started Ensemble, because my journey was through fashion, my wife Sal would always wonder why there were all these beautiful Indian things made abroad. You could find in New York and Tokyo, but it was never available in India. And we had the idea to start a store called Ensemble, which was actually her idea, after a very nice article, a cover story of India Today, where they had Feroz Gujral on the cover in a dhoti with a little jacket and a turban, considered men's clothing, and it talked about the new fashion consciousness, a burgeoning movement. And so we talked to designers who we met, like Rohit Khosla and others, to say, why don't you come and design, for your own Indian identity? Sure, you worked at Albert Nippon and Versace. You can do a skirt. So his first collection was based on the uniforms at Rashtrapati Bhavan, but they were swing tops and short skirts. And from that, a whole movement has happened. And it happened because lifestyles were changing. People wanted more constructed clothing. To go to a wedding today, people want to dance all night, not sit with 200 kilos in the zenana and be on display. So everything has to change for life. And I think that freedom has now come into it. I think right now there's tons of young designers doing very cool contemporary things, using A-craft, shibori or Thai bandhani. I myself have just started a line called OTT, where we take the drapes of India and make them into contemporary things. Remember, we came from a country that draped fabric, 6 meters, turbans, dhotis. So even to understand construction and fit took us 30, 40 years. I had to go back to study. And it's for doing it for 20 years that you learn and you engage. That's also why I think it was so much easier to adapt or adopt or be derivative of Western things. But I think the moments come where, and you'll see it a lot in this fair, where we're much easier about it. And I hope the best is yet to come.
Abha, we'd love to hear your perspective on historic consciousness in your field of conservation.
Actually, India, we have 6 millennia of built heritage, so we're not a new player in the game. We have 6 millennia of design. We have 6 millennia of, even when you look at Harappa, you have town planning, you have sanitation, which probably even after 6,000 years, we haven't been able to give to every village and city. So we come from a culture and a civilization that was seeped in design, and then not just colonization, but post-colonization, this whole aspiration to match global standards, to ape the West, had as its casualty the non-monumental. Because in India, with so many thousands of years of history, not even 4,000 monuments are nationally protected. And the problem with that is that you have 1 lakh listed buildings in London, and the area around it, and you don't even have anything of that in India. So growing up as an architect, I was very conscious. I was studying here in Delhi at the School of Planning and Architecture. We had some great modernists come and teach us. We also had Satish Grover teaching us Indian history, and I thought that was just, he would smoke 4 cigarettes, go through a lecture, and whatever he said was imprinted in your mind. It was like literally you'd never forget it. But with that sort of a background, when I graduated, I was very clear that I wanted to work with Joseph Allenstein. And the reason for that was he was making contemporary buildings around Lodi complex in a historic setting. So neither was he trying to ape those or, just add domes for the fun of it, nor was he trying to be brutalist and completely do something that was outrageous. He was building with a lot of sensitivity. And I literally used to wait and hope that he wouldn't, close his shop before I graduated. I went to his studio for an interview, and that's when it's sort of struck me. I didn't know that, but he went through my work and he said, you seem to have an interest in conservation. I worked on the India Habitat Center, but eventually I decided that I would do something because it was just bothering me that nobody was really working on it. And that's the move to Bombay, 95, because we as a nation were only talking about monuments. And sadly, even today, we talk about the Taj yellowing marble. We don't talk about the setting of the Taj or Agra, which has completely gone to dogs. And in the last 3 decades, we've lost so much of our non-monumental fabric. We've lost our cities. We've had cases of the entire Lad Bazaar being actually demolished by the government for a stupid road widening scheme. We've lost so much of Chandni Chowk, of Shah Jahanabad, and just, Shekhawati and everything else. So what I've been doing in the last 26 years of my practice is looking at that non-monumental, is looking at where do we fill the gaps. So whether it is looking at street furniture and historic streetscapes in the Dadabhai Nauroji Road in Bombay, which I started in 98, to working on Ladakh's non-monumental but 15th century heritage, which just did not have an ASI tag, so we worked with local villagers, and very recently with Priya to revive the oldest Sikh fort, the Ranbas in Patiala's Kira Mubarak, and give it a new lease of life as a luxury resort for a state which is just, people have always dismissed Punjabis as they have agriculture, they don't have culture. Man, you walk into those Sheesh Mahals and you look at the Aleppo glass and gilded, ceilings and the chandeliers that are hanging from the ceiling, and it's seeped in culture. It's just that we've almost tried to not just be defiant, but we've been embarrassed of our culture. And I think that's the time, perhaps now is the time, when as a nation we're probably more confident. We're not definitely like bowing down to the West just because they're white. We are being now confident enough to look at our own history, at our own culture, not be shy of it, but just say, this might be something I'd like to innovate with. And therefore, both preservation and conservation are important, but equally important is being able to adapt, to innovate, to look at new design, which is not replicating, but sits well with the old.
Thank you so much. Hello, Shalini. Your work in design and also your recent fellowship, we'd love to learn through your practice how you're engaging with revival, with resorting to old design and bringing it back.
Yeah, okay. My work has mostly been abroad. I've been living in London for 30 years, and I've had the opportunity to work in maybe 10 different countries. But my love story has always been India, whatever's handmade in India, and trying to take that abroad and use it in different settings. And I think as a country, we are very rich. We've had the Persians, we've had the Mughals ruling us, then we had the brainwashing from the English, as Tarun said. So we were westernized a lot. And I think the Indian modern family always wanted a Western home. So when I was personally building a home for myself in Delhi, about 8 years ago, I was told to buy sofas from Italy, buy wood from Scandinavia, marble from Italy, and so on. And I said, no, I want everything made in India. So I literally set up a village, trained people. They're quite trained, but just, if you don't use a muscle, it stops working. So just getting that muscle to start working. So taught them how to do terrazzo flooring, using tea mirror tiles in innovative ways, using wood in the ceilings, and different patterns and designs. And I'm really, really happy with what they created. So it was just setting up a full craft village, handmade village in the house to invent that. And that was about 8 years ago. But in 8 years, I've seen a major shift in India coming to ID. I see ID's grown in many different ways. There's just fabulous designs here. And then you just feel, why would anyone want to buy anything from abroad if you're making a house in India? But more than that, even if I'm making something abroad, for example, I'm doing a house in Geneva, where the owner is a very important collector of Monets and so on. And so there I'm lining walls, upholstering walls with beautiful textiles, which Tarun is creating for us, which are just exquisite. So I can't wait to see that room filled with these Indian heritage skills. And it's a very contemporary home. So I really like the idea of contemporizing the artisans from India so that it's used in more modern homes, because that's what most people want now. So that's how Shakti started, which is a design residency. And Shakti is very global because the jury is global and Indian. And the jury are very important people, very thoughtful people who select candidates from around the world and in India, bring them to ateliers in India, and create something really special with these handmade techniques, and that will be exhibited in India and abroad. So this handmade story in India can be told in many different countries and become a fashion.
Thank you so much. You know, there's some very profound things that the three of you shared with us today, and it takes me back to the field that I work in archaeology, from the minimalism of and the preciseness of the Harappans, where garment, the one priest figure that we found, had a beautiful tapestry on top of it. You know, it had these flower patterns, what one would see as a textile draped over one shoulder of the priest figure that we found. Similarly, the maximalism of some of the Indian sculptures that we see, whether it's the jewelry patterns or the textile patterns, and then the material culture that slowly is dying. Abha, one of the things that you mentioned is how our cities are dying. And one of the work that I do is in documenting these residential houses of Delhi, which are rapidly being broken down and being replaced by sort of cookie cutter houses. Obviously, people are pride, and I believe in everything you both said about built architecture. But there is a certain sense of going back to identity, something that Tarun mentioned, that we are feeling more confident now in going back to that identity and going back to, going back to our own design language over here, right? So I did want to take us to the next question about agency that we are becoming so proud about. The various, absolutely diverse craftspeople, the guilds, the masons, within your respective practices, within your respective curatorial decisions and restorative work, how can you advise people in your respective fields to give the right credit and agency to those people who've held on to these knowledge systems, these ancient knowledge systems? For example, Abha, when you do go back to places like Punjab or places like Bombay, there are some masons who still know the old way of doing it, the exact right way that it used to be done. And similarly, when you go back to certain weavers, they inform us as to why this particular silk may be important and better used than the other machine-made garments. So give us a little insight about your field, about how that agency is being brought back to those who've held on to these old knowledge systems.
So, in the field I work in, I have to say also that nothing was documented. Firstly, we were a drape tradition. And till Ravi Verma came, unlike portraiture in Europe, where you've got every century documented and each era based on who was, Georgian or Edward, Elizabethan, there's nothing here. There was some remnants of textiles. Then you have Ravi Verma. And then, the miniatures are beautiful, but it's so stylized that you can see pattern. But there's nothing in terms of what we consider fashion in today's usage of the word. The one thing that has survived and has been amazing in India is weaving, of course, and embroidery, because that is the only thing that we Indian designers have learned directly from the karigars, because there's no one to teach it. And by sitting there year after year and experimenting and having 20 people, you learn the terminology. You might not do it yourself, but you know how to get or how to explain something. And of course, there's wonderful references. Sadly, the better references are abroad in the V&A, or even when India did this wonderful Costumes of Royal India show at the Met, which is what I walked into by mistake. No matter how much I tried, they would never do it in India. It went from New York to Tokyo, and that's a typical Indian thing. And then everyone complains about Bollywood. Well, why don't you show this fantastic show in India? So I think we've learned embroidery from them. I think there's a very big move that's happened with the Chanakya school being acknowledged by Dior. That's a first, because everyone pretended that work was done abroad because they wanted to put European labels. And I think that these older master craftsmen who are actually on their last legs, unfortunately, most of their children didn't want to repeat their work, because if you sat on a true handloom, it's excruciating. And unless somebody paid them well, there's no reason why the child who's looking at Instagram and this great world out there would want to do that. And that's been a big challenge. Till now, where because people are earning much better, and of course there's a paucity of jobs, so economics always plays a role, that now they're willing to learn, but also because the quality of the work's being done is much better. I moved to Delhi because I needed big workspace. I couldn't do that in Bombay. And our craftsmen sit in the most fantastic conditions. If it's hot, we air conditioned. They're given respect. It wasn't like this. Everything was done in slums in Bombay when I started. So, we've also got to stop treating artisans and craftsmen because of the population like, some basic knockers. That's how they're mostly treated. You got to respect them. And only when that whole system goes deep inside will the next generation want to go out. Like the pride you see in Italy with, father to son, with 6 generations. Well, that's how it was in India. But everything upended and changed too fast. And for those of us who work in it, if we can basically help them really improve their lot and feel engaged as opposed to just mechanically embroidering or doing whatever they do, I think that's the game changer for this.
From Bombay to Punjab to several other, projects on vernacular architecture that you worked on, how was your experience of working with the local community there?
So there are areas where the traditional wisdom is alive and it's still there, but the custodians are of an age where they're in their 80s. And that is a very alarming thing that we're not beginning to realize, which is suddenly in 10 days, we'll realize that 10 years, the generation has gone. So 20 years ago, I was working on a project in a 15th century Buddhist temple called Chamba Lakhang in Basgo in Ladakh. And the entire building was on the World Monuments Endangered list. It was on the hill, an earth structure which was slowly sinking down, and the roof had caved in. And there, when I was brought into the project, there already had been an engineer and an architect for a year, and then they sort of resigned or whatever, because they just couldn't understand how they're going to completely restore or fix this building. So they'd brought in steel and structural struts and things that were completely alien. So when the whole team changed and my team came in, I said, if this was built 600 years ago, we should be able to fix it using those local traditions. And my teachers were the local meme, the older gentlemen of the village community, and they taught me that there's 4 types of clays, and zasa is used as a particular time, and markhala is the last one, and it's because it's hydrophilic in nature, and so many other things that inform my practice today are because of what I was taught by the local villagers. But unfortunately, that doesn't remain everywhere. So when I began 10 years ago working on the Kila Mubarak, Punjab had not had any conservation for 70 years. And therefore, the people, the local mistris were not familiar with lime, with chuna, the way Rajasthani craftsmen still are. And finally, what we had to do when we were looking at restoring the buildings and the roofs had caved in and we had to do lime plaster, we actually landed up, and I have photographs of those, of old Sikh gentlemen with long white beards, 80-year-old. There were 3 80-year-old mistris who actually knew how to do that, and then they trained the younger ones. But what if this doesn't happen and that generation dies out and we haven't documented the processes, we haven't trained the next generation? And one thing I completely agree with Tarun is to do with the social strata. Somewhere this stupid caste system is so deeply embedded in our psyche that anybody who works with their hands is not given credit. They're just pushed down the social hierarchy. And unless we're able to break free from that psychological mold that, yes, if you're a carpenter, a mason, you work with your hands, you need to be given credit and respect for that. Why would the next generation want to suffer that unless we're able to give them the dignity that they deserve?
Shalini, in the world of design, I mean, one of the things that I would like to take on from what Abha said is society and how society treats those who have been holding on to old design. In your practice, while having seen the world and then come back to India to really celebrate what resides here and then promote that, in your practice, what would be your recommendations and within your curatorial decisions, what have you sort of relied on in terms of giving back agency to those?
I think as Abha and Tarun said, we really need to celebrate these artisans. We should not treat them as laborers. Nowhere else in the world, any artisan who's producing this caliber of work is celebrated. Their names are known. Here, they're really not known. They're just someone else copying the same design, doing the same old thing. I think it'll be nice to give them a breath of fresh air where they can create what they want to create, because they have so much talent. They have so much ideas of their own. So if they could create that, and then they get their names printed somewhere. Like I know Jaipur Rugs came out with this Manchaha collection, which is beautiful because they just let the weavers weave their rugs and write their names in them. And I think that's one of their most successful collections. So I think that's one way to empower them. And if you don't have the economic stability, if you don't have the livelihood, it's very hard for them to carry on working, for the next generation to carry on working. So it's really for people like us, designers, to actually make this work very appealing, you know, create that want so that people will aspire to have this and to create designs. So I would like to mix these ancient traditional techniques with modern, you know, wisdom and put them together so it can be used in a contemporary setting as well, because not everybody wants to live in a very ethnic setting anymore. But that ethnic artisanal craft can be modernized, can be used in a more interesting setting. So I think some designers are doing it here, and you can see them in the collectible section and in various places at the fair. And I think that movement needs to grow a little bit more.
You're absolutely right, and I think ID will serve as a great platform to engage more deeply with that later today for everyone here. And I think giving back agency, what Tarun was saying while we were all speaking, was it really is a crisis. And while your respective practices are working with the tangibility of cultural revival in so many ways, it is the intangibility that also requires such a deep engagement and requires our deep concern. Like Abha said, what happens in Ladakh, what happened in Ladakh, the solutions are essentially right there. And those people are rapidly aging. And the next generation, the motivation, they have so much pressure, you know, with rural to urban migration. You know, that generation is always like, hum शहर जाएंगे और कुछ बन के आएंगे, कुछ और करेंगे, कुछ अलग करेंगे. And in that ancient lineage tradition that gets passed down becomes broken. Hopefully, we are all in a hope that there are some aspects of change that can address those very aspects. But within your practices, I do believe that bringing them back to the market is what is key at this particular point in time. Before I jump into a very essential aspect of this discussion, I would like to expand a little bit more on the design aspect that resides in India, the diversity of design that resides in India. What do you think in the field of garments, in the field of textiles, is the urgent thing that requires attention from all designers such as yours and the emerging designers? What do they need to immediately look at and address?
So, you know, there are a lot of designers and other stores, may not be branded as designers, doing very beautiful heritage textiles and really pushing the boundaries, you know, all over the country and mixing designs. I don't think that's an issue. The real problem is that I was in Surat and I was at a factory and they were showing me these amazing saris made out of viscose. They're now sending them to Banaras, and Banaras is selling them as Banarasi saris. I couldn't tell. I mean, they look so amazing. And I think if we allowed this to happen, you know, first the Chinese were buying our patterns, our designs and dumping their fabric. Then the government wisened up to it. Silk is now out of reach for most Indians because the silk monopoly is controlled by the Chinese. The Indian government didn't do anything about it. So as prices are pushed higher for things that are handmade, the temptation, and I find this all the time with our commercial brands. Let's go to Surat. Let's go to, and there's soulless big factories, these giant machines just whipping out fabrics, polyester, blends. Well, it's happening at the cost of somebody. So I think that for those of us who can and afford it in whatever way we can, like we do with food, we have to be conscious about handmade. And I think as designers, my new line is all about using a small element, so you don't have to be wearing something for lakhs at a wedding, that you can buy a beautiful shirt which has a pop of chicken curry or something, so it can be in everyday life, your sportswear, what we call sportswear, that you use it in your day-to-day life. We can't have beautiful Indian textiles and all reserved only for Indian ceremonial functions. I was at a kind of more mid-level, someone worked in the company's son's wedding, and they were all wearing Surat copies of what you see at the designers. I mean, they felt horrible. They looked okay from a distance. The embroidery came to the front. But that's the rage right now. And if we don't collectively do something to stop it, well, that's a mega force. It's a tsunami. And, so it's about economics because, of course, people have to feel engaged. They have to earn well so that they're not looked down on. They're treated as artisans. So many things have to happen at once. But this industrialization and the demands of a boardroom, which is like, hey, we don't care. How much did you grow last year? What's the bottom line? They don't give a damn if it's handmade or not. So it takes a very strong consciousness and a bit. So I've now segregated. Okay, this company is going to stay hand, And luckily, that's what's growing the fastest because that's becoming the rarity now. It feels different. And what is luxury if it's not about what it feels on your skin? I keep telling people it's not a logo, it's not what you're showing off. What do you feel in it? I think there's a consciousness changing, but much more has to be done. And of course, we have to be conscious and fight this mass market thing. There are 90 billion pieces of fast fashion going into landfills every year. I mean, it's a fact. And it's increasing, and anything that has polyester is not biodegradable. So it's resulting in other consequential things. It's up to all of us, really. It's time is gone to blame anybody else. You have to do what you can, and if everybody does that little bit, I think it'll make a difference.
Abha, amongst all the cities slowly becoming, they look the same now. What would be your recommendations, especially to people who reside in these cities, people make the cities, to kind of retain that sort of vernacular tone, the diversity of truly Indian design of built architecture? What advice would you give to people in regards to that?
I think more than people, governments need advice. They have an archaeological survey of India that's only looking at 100 meters around a monument. Outside it, there can be just about anything. There are no controls and nothing like urban controls.
Even within the 100 meters, nothing's
nothing.
been controlled.
Even in a city like Delhi, you have something called Lal Dora, which means you draw a red line, you can do what the crap you want to in the middle of it. It means that our planners have abandoned their responsibility for over 7 or 8 decades. And that is the problem with India, that our urban planning is not catching up with how it should be. We still only see, across India, land use plans in 2D. Nobody looks at what height a building is going to, what material it's happening. My thesis project 30 years ago was Khidki Village. And I shudder to go back to Khidki Village because being a Lal Dora, everything, just in near Saket, it's this gorgeous, 13th century mosque and an area around it. So we feel that, yes, we're a great country, but if a tourist comes, he should be just blindfolded at Agra railway station. Strangely, we don't even have an Agra airport, which is half decent considering the world comes to see the Taj. And then he should be taken blindfolded, and the blindfold should be opened miraculously at the gate. Why? What's happening with the rest of our cities? What kind of... Chandni Chowk, you see Alico Pond, you see glass, and these buildings are built like overnight, Saturday, Sunday, and of course the MCD guys are probably bribed off somewhere, and the next day that Haveli is gone and there's something strange. So please, let's wake up and say that if this continues, why on earth would the tourists want to come and see just the same rubbish that we're creating? Every city we're turning into a slum because of individual greed and public, not even indifference, it's just And it's
Like the thirst of monetization
of
of real estate.
monetization. And the lawmakers and the municipal corporations and the planners completely abandoning cities.
I don't think
to
even think
their
they know
fate.
better, and they're just greedy. Culture can't be run. You needed a Popul Jaikar and a Martan Singh and people who grew up and were trained in it to have a point of view. I don't think anyone has a point of view. I mean, look at everything that's done to decorate a city. Look at the new things that have been built.
Tarun, one can have a point of view, nobody's listening. I might have a point
That's
of
the
view.
main problem, the authorities. Yes.
The people in power need to wake up and smell the reality and say, what are we doing collectively to our cities?
Yeah. You're so right. And that really feeds into the work, Shalini, you're doing with the insides of these houses, with these buildings, which are beginning to look like, I can speak for Delhi while documenting these houses, they're all beginning to look like marble palaces, and none of the marble is from India. So, just kind of to close our wonderful conversation, and what would you give as a tip to people and also upcoming designers, interior designers, people who want to support the emerging talent? What tips and recommendations would you give to them for a little note on sustainability, a little bit note on going back to regional identity, to our own identity?
I think the vernacular of a place is very important. What you do in Punjab, you can't do in Jaipur, you can't do it in Goa. So I think to respect where the project is situated and then to create interiors for that area. And there's enough to learn from local people there. There's enough artisanal techniques out there, and to revive that. And also India is probably a very sustainable country. So to recognize that, to use materials that are sustainable and that will last a very long time. So I think handmade, using sustainable materials, understanding the vernacular of a place, and really having a strong narrative, thought to what you're building, not copy and paste.
Thank you. That's lovely recommendations on actually fashioning individual identity. Well, with that, I think we'd love to close this session. I'd love to thank all our speakers. Thank you, Tarun. Thank you, Abha. Thank you, Shalini. Thank you so much for sharing the work that you have been doing. Thank you so much.